Hi everyone, how's it going? There's laundry in the back, so that's going to get real loud. At a certain point, thankfully, these microphones usually cancel out noise. Although I don't know how much noise is being cancelled out right now, but I felt like I really needed to talk about this. I was supposed to save my mic battery for my readings, but I felt like I needed to talk about this press conference where Ellie Reynolds was with the leader of Reform, Nigel Farage, and there were journalists pressing him about that ditzy arse MP that he had in his office, talking about how black and brown people are driving her mad. And I'm just sort of like, yeah, black and brown people in adverts driving her mad. Like, fuck all that bitch thinks. But anyway, journalists were pressing Nigel Farage about that. And of course, he gave some limp-wristed, well, not, I shouldn't say limp-wristed because that's homophobic. I've got to really watch that language. He gave some fucking like wishy-washy, flim-flam answer about, oh, I was very upset. Like, bro, shut the fuck up. Your whole campaign was built around racism. Okay. So he gave some stupid ass answer because that's what he does. Right. But then Ellie Reynolds piped up, a grooming gang victim. And I'm assuming that she was a grooming gang of most likely, brown men. There can be black gangs as well, but I'm assuming she was the victim of a brown grooming gang. So Ellie Reynolds piped up, this grooming victim piped up, and she said, look, I get that what that woman's comments were kind of gross. I understand your reaction to that. But you're spending the whole conference talking about this woman's comments when I'm paraphrasing her here, when I'm sitting right here and I'm trying to talk to you about white grooming gang victims that fall through the cracks because they're white or who are chosen because they're white. This is where I'm getting into some very complicated territory right now. I will always maintain that white trafficking and abuse victims are every inch as important as black and brown trafficking victims, or grooming victims or abuse victims. They are all important. And I know that sounds obvious, but it's the truth. Okay. Grooming victims and trafficking victims and abuse victims are not about race, should never be about race. But the tragedy with white victims is that this is what I've realized, right? When it comes to white women and white people who are abused, trafficked, or groomed, the problem is that the same white privilege that gives them the benefit of the doubt in everyday society is the same reason why they are usually more sought out for these gangs than other people, from what I've seen, especially in Western countries, right? Because of white supremacy, white victims are seen as more valuable, and thus there is, more of a concentration of white girls and women, and especially especially if they're blonde and blue-eyed, I found. It's a double-edged sword where the same white privilege that has white people being given the benefit of the doubt in mainstream society and being seen as more valuable in mainstream society, that causes the specific problem of white girls being sought out by these gangs because they are white girls, right? So it's like these white victims live in this no man's land where their racial privilege means that nobody really hears them in the same way. Well, nobody really hears them on the so-called left or mainstream society. Nobody really hears them because the white privilege thing is there, right? So nobody really hears them on that side, unless they want to specifically talk about misogyny. And then on the other side of the equation, quite often a lot of abuse victims are not listened to until things are way too late, and until they've already gone through so much that, you know, the only thing they have to contribute is their voice telling their story of horrific abuses that they've gone through. So it's like they're in that no man's land where they are quite clearly vulnerable, because a lot of these women that are snatched up for grooming gangs, 9 times out of 10, they're very vulnerable girls, right? They're very vulnerable girls. They're not women. They're vulnerable girls, vulnerable children, snatched up off the streets. So it's like they're too vulnerable for the rest of society to give a damn what they have to say. And then at the same time, because of their whiteness, they have privilege as well, which like kind of offers up another form of neglect here. So it's like they're caught in this weird space where they definitely need help, and they definitely need assistance, and they definitely need kindness and compassion shown to them. But because they are victims of these grooming gangs that are not white, because the grooming gangs are not white, they don't get as much press over this side. They don't get as much, you know, do you understand what I'm saying? They don't get as much press over this side, over our side of the curtain, because the grooming gangs are brown. We don't talk nearly enough about grooming gangs of all colors, all races, or like, do you understand what I'm saying? It's usually because we are over this side talking about white supremacy and white patriarchal supremacy. There's only a very specific type of grooming gang that we tend to be interested in, and that's the far right. The grooming gangs that we are most interested in talking about are the ones in power. They are rich white men. Those are the grooming gangs, arguably the most dangerous grooming gang of all. I'm not going to hold anybody, but those are the ones that we talk about the most. Those are the ones that hold the most of our attention. Over here on the left, we don't talk much about Afghanistan and Iran anymore. We don't talk about, you know, how Muslim countries, some Muslim countries subjugate their women. We don't talk about that over this side. We talk about Palestine, right? Which is important to talk about because the Palestinians are being genocided, right? But we don't talk about, you know, the human rights abuses in Muslim countries over this side. We don't talk about it as much anymore because all of our thought and attention is on the Z word. So we don't talk about all of these gangs or all Abrahamic faiths, you know, and how black and brown people can be gatekeepers of these things. We don't talk about that nearly enough. I mean, we talk about skin folk or not kinfolk, but we don't talk nearly enough about how people within our own community can perpetrate crimes against not only the other side, not only against white people, but against our own as well. We don't talk about that nearly enough. We don't even challenge child abusers in our own families 9 times out of 10. So why would we challenge any child abuser or groomer that wasn't a white, rich male? Why would we do that? So that's one way in which white girls who are groomed and abused and trafficked can find themselves vulnerable. On the other side of the curtain, though, are the far right who, upon experiencing a fraction of everything that they've put every other race through, have become violent, have become reactionary. And when white girls find that the only people listening are those far right groups, and even then only after they've gone through the most horrific shit, when they go over that side and find that the far right are the only ones listening, what ends up happening is that it creates this cycle of white supremacy again. The far right uphold white supremacy that dictates that only white people have value, or only white people should be able to live life as humans, right? So you've got that belief. That belief has a trickle down effect where not only white women find themselves more privileged over black and brown people, but it also makes them more vulnerable on the flip side, because being white, they're seen to have more value. And if they're seen to have more value in the marketplace, if they are the ones that make the most money, then those white girls are more likely to be at least, yeah, I mean, those white girls are likely to be victims, aren't they? If they're seen as high currency by the same system that puts all white people at the top, then who is going to make the most money for these gangs? Rich white gangs or brown gangs? Like, who are the ones that are going to make the most money for both sides? Is it not going to be white women? Is it not going to be white women? White women are going to be the ones that are seen as the most valuable here. And it's a direct result of the white supremacists that seem to be the only ones listening to these women, because they've been victims of abusers and gangs that are not white. So you've got the far right, the same ones upholding the same white supremacy, putting white women at a higher value and therefore making them more likely to be groomed or kidnapped. Well, not more likely, but you get where I'm going with this. Because white supremacy creates a value system where white women are more economically viable as trafficking and abuse victims, it actually feeds and perpetuates the cycle where white women will continue to be seen as, do you understand what I'm saying? It actually fuels their trafficking. It doesn't actually alleviate the problem. But what do you expect these white women to do when reform are the only ones listening to them? That they're the only ones willing to listen to, like, the wider problem of, you know what, like, black and brown people are not the heroes of every story. They're the only ones willing to listen to that side of things. And it perpetuates the cycle, which is really, really unfortunate. And then on top of that, you've got to think the far right, the same ones that are allowing these grooming victims to speak, they're the same ones, the far right are the same ones who want to drop down well, not reform are not the ones doing this, but the far right collective as a whole, they're the same ones who want to reduce female consent age to, like, what, 12? They're the same ones who want to reduce the consent age to child age. And yet that is the only political side that is listening to these white women. But then again, I can't really say that because we saw evidence of a video where a far right well, not a far right victim, but a grooming victim of white people went to an all white rally and protested. So yeah. But then she was groomed by white men. So no, she probably doesn't apply here. But when you've got white women and white girls who have been victimized by grooming gangs that are not white, and the only ones willing to listen to black and brown people aren't always the heroes are that side, it creates a self-perpetuating cycle where white women and white girls will continue to be trafficked. It's just that now we are all experiencing a political shift where trafficking is about to be legalized because a lot of people are about to be caught out for their crimes. And you have to remember, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, they did not like black people. They were racist as fuck. Ghislaine Maxwell is racist as fuck. And they liked white women. I think it's white and Asian women. I'm not sure though. I'm just remembering it from the Maria Farmer interview. I think it's white and Asian women that they prefer to traffic, mostly because they believe that even though, as Jewish people, they believe they were truly special, they were just fucking white. Ghislaine Scatwell is just fucking white. Okay. Epstein was just fucking white. If you know the history about Jewish people, you know what I'm talking about. They're just fucking white. But even though they believe that as Jewish people, they were the chosen ones and anyone non-Jewish were the goyim, right? White women and white girls, especially white girls, I want to emphasize white girls, they are not women when they are trafficked and groomed, okay? They still believed and still knew that white girls were more likely to fetch higher prices, especially among the high profile clients that these white girls were sold to. So again, this is how white supremacy and patriarchy create this perpetual cycle where white victims of non-white people fall through the cracks. And it's really, really unfortunate. It's really unfortunate that trafficking and abuse victims fall through the cracks of a fucking race war. I remember there was this post about this young Swedish girl, this 16-year-old Swedish girl who was raped by an Eritrean man, a black man, right? And my immediate thought was was how horrific that girl's experience must have been, because when you are raped by somebody, and I'm not talking about somebody who refuses to come out of you when you say stop, I'm talking about like literally being brutalized, right? With the woman screaming and crying and the man not caring because he wants to rape you, right? This 16-year-old Swedish girl was raped horrifically. And my immediate thought was really taking in her experiences and really understanding what this girl went through. She's never going to be right again. She's never going to be right again. She's never going to trust her own body again, not fully. It's going to take years at the very least to really understand who she is because of what's happened to her. The trauma that comes from somebody violating you in a lot of ways is worse than death. And that's exactly what that 16-year-old girl was subjected to. And that was all I could think of. All I could think of in my mind was like the trauma that this girl was going through. I wasn't thinking about how, this would be fueled by a race war. I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking about her and her experiences and how she would always remember this and always be traumatized by this. And most likely because of the way that, a lot of things are racialized now, how she might turn into a racist herself because, the Swedish courts, I think they left him with a 12-month sentence. I'm thinking that's fucking wild. They gave him a really lenient sentence for raping a 16-year-old girl. So there's all these little, even then it's like, this girl shouldn't have been raped. Even then my mind was like, this girl should not have been raped in the first place. Do you understand what I mean? That was my first thought. It's only now that I think like the effects it might have on her psyche, especially given European culture or how culture is anti-immigration now. But she was raped. That's the most important thing. This 16-year-old girl was raped. Violently. I mean, all rape is violent, but she was brutalized. And that was all I could think about. And then I read the comment section of the person this girl's story was told on. And I saw that they were saying, oh, great, now everybody's going to hate black people even more. I'm thinking, hold on a minute. What? Why is your first thought, oh, how are black people going to look? That wasn't even my first thought. That was something that I thought after the fact. Like, why the fuck is your immediate thought of, oh, great, now they're going to think all black and brown people are rapists and things like that? And I'm like, first of all, racist people are going to think whatever they want to think. Second of all, a girl has been raped. That should be your first priority. Why is it your first priority about what other white people are going to think of us? The Eritrean man wasn't fucking thinking about that when he raped that girl. When he raped that Swedish girl, he wasn't fucking thinking about that shit. The sex offenders over here in the UK troubling women white women or even other women from this country, they're not thinking about the effects it has on black and brown people when they do these things. So why are you thinking about it? Your only thought should be on protecting trafficking and abuse victims, and that's it. And listening to survivors, and that's it. That should be anybody's only political allegiance. Why are you thinking about this? Why is your pain, this girl's pain, why is the first thing that you think about seeing this girl's pain is how racists think of us? Like, why is that your first thought? If the perpetrators don't think about that shit, why are you thinking about that shit? Why? Even with me, I even had to check myself over previous posts that I made, because I'm hearing about people like P. Diddy and all the rest of it. And even though I was right, I was also thinking about the wider landscape of white supremacy and why P. Diddy was brought down in the first place. It was a humiliation ritual to get him to shut up about race, because he was given all these other privileges as a child trafficker. They wanted him to shut up about race. That's what all that was about. But even me, even though I gave acknowledgement to his victims, I was still over here thinking about how his situation was politically about to be played. And that, like, it was only when I saw that Swedish girl was raped and how she felt about it. It was only then that I realized exactly how far things have gone, and exactly how full of shit people actually are. This is my thing, right? This is my thing that I can't stand, and that I've always spoken out against. It is victims of trafficking and abuse and rape and torture and murder being laid at the altar of other people's political opinions. That is the one thing that I've always called out. I will even call myself out for that shit, like, as you've heard. I don't like that shit. Why are you thinking to yourself, when it comes to any victim of any trafficking, rape, or anything like that, why is their race important? Why is their race important? Why are you thinking of how you're going to play this in terms of racial politics? Your only thought should be protecting them. But a lot of the times, people's first thought are not protecting these people. The uncomfortable truth is that a lot of people's rage, especially black and brown rage, it's suppressed and repressed for a reason. Our rage is repressed, it's suppressed. That rage needs somewhere to go. So it's for that precise reason why we don't pay attention to abuse and trafficking. We don't pay attention to rape. We don't pay attention to any of these things until they become these things, until it goes too far. That's when we have an excuse to let our anger out. That's when we have an excuse to let our violent urges come through. We are not protecting victims. We're punishing wrongdoers. Or we are, putting on this big show of using our rage to express desire of punishing perpetrators. Like, it was never about the victims. It was always about emotional porn. And that's the problem that I have. It was always about emotional porn. That's why victims of grooming are not usually listened to until it's too late. That's why victims of rape are not usually listened to until it's too late. That's why grooming gangs and trafficking gangs and high-profile trafficking rings are usually politicized towards a particular endeavor by both sides of the equation. Because when we really get down to brass tacks, trafficking, torture, abuse, and murder are all cornerstones of attaining power and generational wealth. I'm going to say it again. Trafficking, murder, torture, and rape are all cornerstones of achieving generational wealth and power. This is where white supremacy is ahead of everyone else. And the reason why, our anger is weaponized against us when it comes to stories like this, the reason why our anger is weaponized in this way is because people in control want to make sure that those four cornerstones remain in their power. So our anger, which is repressed and suppressed, used to punish perpetrators, or punish perpetrators according to our own political views. All this anger that is weaponized against us in order to further cement our beliefs. They are exploited by people who want to actually maintain those cornerstones of power at the top. And especially among the far right. That's what's at the core here. At the core of this is the repression of emotion, the repression of desire, even the repression of knowledge. Because true knowledge comes from emotion. It doesn't come from a book. And I'm not saying that in a sense of, I know in my heart. No, it's the knowledge that truth is often subjective, right? That's, our knowledge comes from emotion. Our knowledge comes from our environment, comes from the space that we inhabit. That's where our primary source of knowledge comes from, right? So what we know, what we desire, all these things are suppressed to make us functioning depressives. Then an opportunity comes along to at least unleash our sexual frustration, celebrity worship. Now comes an opportunity to release our fears and release our worries, religion. Then comes an opportunity to release our anger and release our rage, pedophiles, murderers, traffickers, torturers. And what we are able to do through these things is justify and weaponize the worst parts of ourselves whilst appearing to be the good guy. For all the talk on all political sides about trafficking, torture, like they don't really care about it. They don't really care about it. Nobody really cares about that. And I know it sounds really harsh to say, but it's the truth. No one really cares. Especially if we feel like we've gotten something out of the hurt and abuse that other people have suffered. None of us really care about that. I've seen that people are literally more willing to participate in trafficking, participate in abuse, and participate in torture, especially if they find it easy to do. Like, they're more willing to participate in that stuff than actually stop it. That's what I've seen that. I've seen that for myself. Yeah. I've seen that for myself because, again, it's an opportunity for emotional porn. It's an opportunity to release their anger and release their abusive tendencies. I've seen that for myself. I've experienced that for myself. People fucking coming after me under the guise of protecting people. It was never about protecting anybody. It was only ever about emotional porn. It was only ever about emotional porn and money. That's the problem that I have with these white girls that are trafficking victims and these white boys that are victims of abuse being ignored. I have a big problem with that, because that shouldn't be happening. Just as much as I have a problem with black children and black girls being abused and black boys being abused and brown girls being abused and brown boys being abused. I have a big fucking problem with that. Big. And I have a big fucking problem with the fact that these abuse victims are constantly ignored. But again, if we're not even willing to confront family members who do that shit, then what are the chances that we will actually address the problem in everyday life, address the problem right in front of us, rather than hiding behind race or hiding behind gender or hiding behind sexuality or hiding behind fucking like whatever the fuck? No, actually, no. The more that we actually address the abuse going on in everyday life, is the less that we will be able to hide behind identity politics. No. Let me rephrase that. The more we are able to express our emotions as a society, properly express our emotions, is the less likely we are to use the opportunity to be our worst selves behind a good cause, or appearing to do it behind a good cause. Because we're hiding our racial bigotry, we're hiding our, and not just white people, everyone. We're hiding our racial bigotry, we're hiding our homophobia, we're hiding our transphobia, we're hiding our with our fucking like all kinds of phobia and bigotry. We're hiding all of that behind these trafficking victims. We're hiding our need to be our worst selves and be seen as the good guy behind these trafficking victims. I've seen it in my own comment section. These comments are literally bleating onto me about how I don't care about white girls being raped. Yet and still, all of these trolls are literally facilitating the trafficking of me. Like, it's like, you know, that's what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? All of these people coming into my comment section, talking to me about how I don't care about people being raped and groomed. I've been raped. You didn't give a shit about me. You didn't ask about that. You're just talking about Brillo pads and shit. You didn't give a fuck about my case. You didn't give a fuck about black girls being raped. And again, my rape, different, because people have, you know, like have been continuously entering me when I've said stop multiple times. It wasn't a case of me screaming or crying. So could I go to the police with it? No, but it was still rape. It's still lack of consent. I've been raped. I've been molested. I've been abused. Did you give a fuck about me? No. Do you give a fuck about any black girls? In fact, there was one woman who was raped in Warsaw as a racial attack, and it was a white man who did it. Not a peep from reform. Not a peep from not a peep from any of these people. But I don't care about white girls being raped or white girls being ganged. You have a rape trafficking victim. You have a molestation victim right the fuck in front of you. That's a person that you're trolling, and you want to turn around and tell me I don't care about white girls being raped. Your trolling online is literally facilitating trafficking, and there are trolls in the comments who are part of that trafficking. But I don't care about white girls being raped. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say people only care about what gives them an emotional release. They only care about emotional porn. Imagine the kind of brokenness you have to have as a person to weaponize the rape of girls and women just to get into another trafficking and torture and abuse victims comment section to tell them that they don't care. Imagine how broken you have to be to facilitate in somebody else's trafficking whilst telling other people that I don't care about trafficking just because I don't want Muslim people ethnically cleansed. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. We don't care about our victims. That's why these white girls fall through the cracks. We don't truly care. On this side of the equation, yeah, we'll give lip service to these white girls being raped by black and brown people. Yeah, we'll give lip service at most. But our priorities over here are white girls and boys that have been raped by white men. Like all of us on this side I hate to admit it, but most of us, we pay lip service to the potential of marginalized people attacking white people. We give lip service to it, then we move on. On the far right side, they don't give a fuck about black or brown victims at all. They don't give a fuck about black or brown victims, and they don't hide it. What they do hide is, you know, perpetuating the fact that they're perpetuating a system where white girls are seen as more valuable for trafficking rings in the first place. They only care about white victims over there. They only care about, and the irony of this is that gangstalking facilitates the kind of trafficking that the far right say that they're against. That, you know, the grooming gangs that they say that they're against. Why do you think these grooming gangs keep getting away with shit and keep getting lenient sentences? There are high profile consumers of these gangs. There are high profile people like, you know, there are high profile people buying services from these grooming gangs, from these trafficking gangs. Again, nobody is addressing that. So it's like they're allowing themselves to be caught up in this racist narrative. Like, but again, the main problem here that I'm seeing is that nobody really cares about the victims, because if we started asking questions, if we started caring about the victims, then we would have to look at our own behavior. And it's actually staggering how many normal people don't understand consent. How many normal people do not understand about empathy. How many normal people do not understand that the shortcuts to abuse, that the shortcuts to, you know, emotional engagement that they've actually taken, or sexual engagement that they've actually taken, that actually leads to abuse. A lot of human beings try to take shortcuts to consideration of other people, and that invariably leads to abuse. You try to take shortcuts, it's going to lead to abuse. And that's at the core of this. If we were really to take victims seriously, if we really were to hear their voices beyond my abuser was white, my abuser was a white man, my abuser was black, my abuser was brown, my abuser was this. If we really sat down to listen to these people, beyond them talking about what the abuser was rather than what the abuser did, if we were really to sit down and examine that, then we'd have to examine our own behavior as human beings. That's at the root of this. I know that in me talking about abuse and speaking out on behalf of other people, that I've had to look at my own behavior throughout the years as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult. I've had to look at my own behavior very, very closely, talking about how abuse works. You know, not just what happened to me, not just like what I went through. I had to look at like the fractions of experiences that I've offloaded onto other people, like fractions of that, not full-bodied experiences of that. But even then, again, taking shortcuts leads to abuse. Small ways, big ways, it doesn't matter. Emotional and sexual shortcuts lead to abuse because you are violating somebody else's space. You're violating somebody else's sense of self so that you can convince and persuade, or so that you can dominate. Do you understand? It amounts to the same thing. So I've had to look at my own behavior really closely in order to truthfully speak out on behalf of victims. I've had to really look at myself, and that's the thing that most people do not want to do, because if they were to stop for a minute and really think about these white girls that have been abused and trafficked, really think about what they went through, instead of thinking about the color of their attackers' skins, and instead thinking about the content of their behavior and their character, that's when we would start understanding, yeah, we have a lot of fucking work to do. And once again, the pillars of power in this society are trafficking, torture, rape, and murder. All the things that we enjoy, especially in privileged countries. That is the foundation. That is the foundation in which our privilege as people is built upon. It's built upon centuries of that to this day. That is what the privileges the rest of us enjoy, the rest of civilized society. What we enjoy is built on the backs of the vulnerable and the trafficked and the abused and the tortured. Even me as a targeted individual who's been through abuse, even I have a relative amount of privilege. Even I have a relative amount of privilege in comparison to somewhere like the Congo. Somewhere like the Congo, like they go through the most unimaginable shit you have ever heard of in your life so that we over here in this country can have fucking cobalt and gold and diamonds. The unimaginable shit that the Congolese go through, that the Sudanese go through, that the Europeans, not the Europeans, the Ethiopians are going through, that the fucking Palestinians are going through. The unimaginable shit that these people have been going through so that we can, in this country, can have what we have. You wouldn't believe it. That's at the root of this. At the root of this is emotional porn, the repression of desire and knowledge, and therefore not being integrated with your own concept of who you are, and the fact that torture, trafficking, rape, and murder are the four cornerstones of a privileged society and generations of it too. And we know exactly what type of work we would have to do in dismantling that and replacing it with a society that is not built on pain. We understand the work that it would take. Just the self-reflection alone would cause untold trauma. Untold trauma. And that's what nobody wants to look at. That's why these white girls will continue to fall through the cracks and continue to be, these white girls who are victims of black and brown men or black and brown people will continue to fall through the cracks for the far right to be snatched up. That's why black and brown women who go through rape and all that type of stuff, they will continue to be ignored by wider society. And black and brown girls who are completely adultified and treated to be older than they actually are, they will always fall through the cracks because, again, these things that are happening to vulnerable people, they form the cornerstones of our society. Who's really gonna stand up to that, really and truly? Our whole lives would have to change. And that's just on an individual level. The amount of music we'd have to stop listening to, the films we'd have to stop watching, the books we'd have to stop reading. Like we'd have to just scrap everything and start over. Doesn't bear thinking about. Doesn't bear thinking about. The amount of work it would take. So nobody does it. Nobody does the work. And instead we continue on these cycles that we know damn well we shouldn't be on, but we allow it to continue anyway, because what's the alternative? The alternative is we'd have to raise everything to the ground and start over. I really have to think about what I'm going to say next before I say it. I feel like this is never going to stop. I feel like the trafficking of people is never going to stop. I feel like the racialization of trafficking and abuse victims is actually just going to make the trafficking problem worse. And if anything, it might legalize trafficking. Nobody really cares about victims like that. People, you can see in the way people are really disgustingly vile to people who hurt themselves rather than people who hurt other people. Because it's about this pathetic idea of dominance. There's so much that's wrong with our world and that we don't address. And we want easy solutions. We want easy solutions to everything. We don't even bother looking at ourselves. That's the tragedy of all this. And to be frank, the same gray area, the same void that a lot of white girls find themselves in, a lot of white boys find themselves in, a lot of white victims of abuse find themselves in. I found myself in that same void because, again, I'm a black woman, black girl, but I'm a black girl who comes from a middle class family. I had two parents who had minor success in the music industry, who know a lot of high profile people, right? And on top of that, I have an uncle who's way up there in terms of fucking engineering and shit, way up there. And then on top of that, I have a cousin, like a younger cousin of mine, 20 years younger than me, who works in STEM. The world is that person's oyster. I've got a cousin that works in STEM. I've got another cousin who has a master's. I've got an older brother who, you wouldn't believe it. Like, you wouldn't believe the shit that he's been able to do, that he's like the people he's met. He's met Kanye, cut his hair, cut Kanye West's hair. Can you believe that shit? I've got a niece who's an actress. I come from a very, in terms of black people, my position is more privileged than some other black people. The only marginalization that I've really faced throughout my life is me being black and me being neurodivergent. That's it. Those are the things that I've been discriminated against for. And because of my middle class privilege, mixed with my blackness and my neurodivergence, I fell through that same void that a lot of other people went through. And on top of that, my abuse, the abuse that I went through, it was bad, but it was never bad enough where people could really be like, are you kidding me? It's only in recent years that my abuse has gotten so bad that other people are looking at it being like, okay, you've got to be fucking joking me here. It's only since I moved out that the abuse got so bad that even people involved in my gang stalking were like, are you fucking kidding me right now? Do you understand what I'm saying? It's only in recent times that I've experienced that. But as a privileged person myself, and I am privileged even now, don't get it fucking twisted, because I come from an asset rich family. To this day, I'm fucking privileged. So I've got privilege on one side, but on the other, I'm black and neurodivergent. So I found myself in that same void that a lot of white poor girls or white girls that are victims of abuse have found themselves in. It was the same void my mother was in. It's the same void my little sister is in. That void that my niece is in. That void I think even some of my cousins are in. Because they're black women. They were still adultified as children. Still given less of the benefit of the doubt than their white peers, right? But at the same time, they have privilege in other ways. So there's that crack, there's that void. There's that void that stops people being sympathetic to our situation as they could be. And then on top of that, with me, astrological phenomenon is partially responsible for why people take particular pleasure in torturing me. I don't want to get into it, but that people take particular pleasure in torturing me just because it's me. So there's that as well. Falling through the void. And it's people like us that either end up, and I know what it's like to fall through the void. So I've I've definitely fallen into the pit of bigotry before, on the pro-black side and on the, not gonna lie, anti-black side as well. I've been both pro and anti-black in my sentiments, in my language. I've been on both sides because of a combination of what I've been taught and a combination of my trauma and falling through the cracks. And, on the pro-black side, I found that I was only listened to because of the experiences that I went through as a black woman or as a black girl, right? My experience as a girl diminished. My experiences as a neurodivergent person diminished. My experience as a queer person, forget that shit. My experiences as a gang-stalking victim, definitely forget it, because the amount of black people who are gang-stalkers out here. But then on the anti-black side, they listened to me when it came to psychiatric abuse against me and the medications. They listened to me when it came to other black people bullying me. They listened to me when it came to my electrosensitivity, which is me being a targeted individual. They listened to me when it came to, when it came to stuff that wasn't stereotypically black that I liked. They listened to me about all that stuff. But when it came to the subject of race, and in fact, on the white side, I got more acceptance for being queer as well, and more acceptance for being neurodivergent on top of that. So I got more acceptance and experience from the white side when it came to that. But when it came to my experience as a black person, queer person, forget it. You fall through the void because you don't speak other people's language. You don't speak their language. You don't say what they want to hear. They want to hear that they're the good guys. They don't want to hear your story. They want to hear how your story affirms their reality. And unfortunately, this is not a unique problem to me or anyone else. This is a global problem. This is a human problem. We only want to hear about things that validate our reality. So people like me, black girls who are relatively privileged, but who fall through the cracks because of other reasons. And then there are white girls who have racial privilege, but everywhere else they don't have privilege at all. They fall through the cracks. Because no one wants to hear the people in the spaces in between, because spaces in between don't make for good stories. They don't make for compelling stories. They don't make for good emotional porn. Respectability and what makes for good emotional porn is a certain amount of respectability, a certain amount of an aspirational nature combined with human emotion and struggle. That's what makes for good emotional porn. But us over here in the void, we don't have it like that. Not unless we're pretty or there's some other factor making us compelling. But we don't have it like that. We don't have us in the void. We don't have it like that. And this was a long rant, but there are no easy answers to this shit. That's another problem that human beings have. We want easy answers to complex problems and situations that need careful thought and that nobody wants to slow down enough to think about because we got bills and shit. Okay. That's what I'm saying. It's But as for me, my political allegiance is this. I don't care if you're white, black, or brown. If you're a victim of this shit, I'm with you. I support you. I love you. And I do what I do, partially for you, partially for myself. But you are one of the main reasons why I even bother getting up in the morning. Real talk. That's my political allegiance. Victims deserve to be heard and supported, not just the parts that we want to listen to. They deserve to have their experiences validated, regardless of whether or not it fits our political allegiances. There are victims falling through the cracks. They must never fall through the cracks. We must always lift them up. Anyway, I have been, hang on, hold on. I've been told to make one more point. I hate this because it's like, I've always got to cram every single idea into every video. And what else was I going to say? Yeah. Gangstalking is the result of what happens when people prioritize emotional porn over victims. Trafficking, torture, murder, and rape doesn't protect anybody. It's not protecting anybody in the long run. It's just perpetuating cycles of abuse that keep going. And like I said, a lot of these perps in the comments, or trolls in my comments, they were full of shit. That's why I left those comments up there. So you could see the bullshit for yourselves. You know, again, I'd much rather be in a lift with a progressive person than a far right person. And it's not even for the obvious reasons either. It's because the levels of compassion and the likelihood to ask questions, the likelihood to probe into things is higher on that side than this one. Again, I've experienced it. So, yeah. Stop letting victims fall through the cracks. Stop trying to squeeze victimhood into your fucking political narrative. It doesn't belong there. I will speak out about white supremacy and patriarchy and gender, transphobia. I will speak out against all of these things until the day I fucking die, right? But I'm not prepared to put my political beliefs ahead of victims of trafficking and abuse and torture and murder. I'm not putting my political views above those people. I'm so sorry. I refuse. I don't give a damn if the victim is white and the perpetrators are black. The perpetrators who do this without remorse, they get the same fucking treatment from me as white rapists. They get the same point of view from me as white groomers. Fuck all of them. And that's it. And now I gotta go. Marsha the Great, out.